corruption. We continue to fight pointless wars over lies, and we are killing innocents and letting our children die in wars just to ensure the Federal Reserve can continue their petrodollar scandal. We are sitting idly by while these crooks continue to loan fake money out to us at interest, stealing our homes, and enslaving our children. Let me make this extremely clear to all of you listening. Many corporations, especially the Federal Reserve, used the government to steal $17 trillion from your children. Your children did not have that money. They are now debt slaves. These people have stolen money from your children that are not even born yet, and sold their freedoms. They have enslaved you and many around the world. Wake up, world. And they did all of this by counterfeiting money and loaning it out at an interest. They have stolen hundreds of trillions from people around the world. Have you heard about Microsoft's Xbox manufacturers in China? They had to install suicide nets outside their buildings to ensure their employees don't jump out of the window to commit suicide. These are the conditions your children in the US will be working under when the debt is soon owed, and it will be owed. It is not a matter of if it will be owed, but it is just a matter of when. And it will happen as soon as the United States economy collapses, which will happen very, very soon. And if you think because you do not live in the United States this does not affect you, you are wrong. And you are next. The only way we can stop this is if we all unite together and fight it. People of the US are waking up to the Federal Reserve scandal, and the powers that be are currently afraid of retaliation. And that is precisely why they trying everything they can to disarm us. You know how the media has been saying gun violence has been out of control and at an all-time high. They are not simply twisting the truth here or exaggerating. They are absolutely bold-faced presenting lies to you. First off, realize, gun violence in the United States has always been shockingly low. And gun violence has dropped by 49% in the last 11 years. The already absurdly low gun violence in America has literally dropped in half. In half. The fact they are saying that it is at an all-time high perfect demonstrates how biased the government and the media is. If this doesn't prove to you that they have an agenda, then nothing will. Do you remember how the media keeps repeating that there has been 74 school shootings since Sandy Hook? Those 74 shootings were not even mass shootings like they claim. Most were suicides and none of them even took place at a school. Not a single one. They are presenting lies to you, America. When will you wake up? At some point you have to ask yourself, why would the government fake 74 mass school shootings involving children? If they get our guns, we will lose the fight against them. And they will take away absolutely all of your freedoms and you and your children will be forever slaves. And don't forget they purposefully put you and your children into that debt. And because the Federal Reserve is present in all countries, the other countries of the world are next soon after. This plan is called the New World Order. It is the same New World Order the Vice President of the United States called for on national TV a month ago. He said we need to strive for and complete the New World Order. This is also the same New World Order President George Bush and President Kennedy said is our country's lifetime goal. And the same New World Order George Bush said on national TV said will happen no matter what we do, and we cannot prevent it. This has all been a long-time plan. The Federal Reserve and their partners want complete control of humanity. We cannot let this happen. They want to rule over us, like kings and queens. And humanity will be forever lost to enslavement by a bunch of tyrants who have publicly admitted they want to kill off the majority of the population so the masses are easier to control. They are going to wipe your bloodline completely off of the earth. He'll tell you the order of things to happen. The enslavement will follow immediately after guns are taken away and you cannot fight back. If they cannot get the guns before the economic collapse, then they will wait until the economy collapses. When the economy collapses, people will be starving. There will be looters and shootings. The government will insist on taking guns away to help, and as soon as the guns are taken away, then we will fall into a complete dictatorship. Do not fall for it. Remember, they are the ones who caused the economic collapse to begin with. This is the same tactic used on Germans and it worked. So expect it. As soon as the economy collapsed and the masses were starving, the German government asked the people to give up their rights and they listened. And then eventually the government was throwing the naked masses into giant burning hot ovens for mass execution. Do not give up your rights. Do not give up your guns. Fight back, as they were the ones who caused the problem. Just so you know, the people who are behind this Federal Reserve scam and New World Order are the same ones who funded Hitler's campaign. Make no mistake, these people are as brutal as Hitler himself, even more brutal. In fact, now we are going to show you some. Assuming America grows some balls and we win, we will need an overall plan.
To preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our choice between economy and liberty, or profusion and servitude. I place economy among the first and most important of republican virtues, and public debt is the greatest of the dangers to be feared. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the very continent their fathers conquered.
He was the world's first utopian thinker. In this, he was inspired by Athens' great rival, Sparta. This was a city-sized machine for turning out great soldiers. Everything the Spartans did, how they raised their children, how their economy was organized, whom they admired, how they had sex, what they ate, was tailored to that one goal. And Sparta was hugely successful from a military point of view. But that wasn't Plato's concern. He wanted to know, how could a society get better at producing not military power, but fulfilled people? In his book, The Republic, Plato identifies a number of changes that should be made. Athenian society was very focused on the rich, like the louche aristocrat Alcibiades, and sports celebrities like the boxer Milo of Croton. Plato wasn't impressed. It really matters who we admire, because celebrities influence our outlook, ideas, and conduct, and bad heroes give glamour to flaws of character. Plato therefore wanted to give Athens new celebrities, replacing the current crop with ideally wise and good people he called guardians, models for everyone's good development. These people would be distinguished by their record of public service, their modesty and simple habits, their dislike of the limelight, and their wide and deep experience. They would be the most honoured and admired people in society. He also wanted to end democracy in Athens. He wasn't crazy. He just observed how few people think properly before they vote, and therefore we get very substandard rulers. He didn't want to replace democracy with a horrid dictatorship, but he wanted to prevent people from voting until they'd started to think rationally. That is, until they'd become philosophers. Otherwise, government would just be a kind of mob rule. To help the process, Plato started a school, the Academy, in Athens, which lasted a good 300 years. There, pupils learnt not just maths and spelling, but also how to be good and kind. His ultimate goal was that politicians should become philosophers. The world will not be right, he said, until kings become philosophers or philosophers kings.
What is the purpose of government? Imagine a time before kings, presidents, or prime ministers, before the formation of society and civilization. This is what philosophers call a state of nature. In this thought experiment, people lived freely, without rules or formal laws. But what exactly does this state look like? For 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes, the state of nature is a war of all against all. Mankind's basic nature is fear, insecurity, death, and turmoil. And from this constant terror, people decided to surrender some basic rights to a sovereign entity, or what he called the Leviathan. If one was, say, fed up with the theft of his potions, the state could pass laws to protect his goods or help him receive some sort of reparation. This protection is important for a number of reasons, but the most significant is that laws and their enforcement keep constant anxiety at bay. For 18th century Swiss-born French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the state of nature is rather different than that conceived by Hobbes. Rousseau sees natural man as independent, solitary, and peaceful. Rousseau thought people were much better off without government. With the creation of agriculture, private property, and the division of labor, however, came inequalities. Unequal access to resources created tension, enmity, and envy. People started to become aware of their limited material situation and lack of upward mobility. They became aware of their unfreedom. This led Rousseau to claim that man is born free and is everywhere in chains. While both philosophers describe the state of nature as a sort of beastly existence absent any morality, they disagree on some fundamentals. Rousseau sees the Hobbesian model as leading to despotism, in which people have no choice but to turn to a third party to secure basic needs. Consequently, they do not freely choose their leaders. Rousseau argues that rather than choosing leaders out of fear, people choose to give up some power and rights, at least so that citizens can be equal. Rousseau dictated that decisions ought to be made for the sake of everyone, instead of a few. This would require that people follow a rule of law that they would follow on their own anyway. For Rousseau, people are better without government, because society means unfreedom and oppression. Whether out of fear or for the sake of equality, the consent to be ruled is called the social contract. So, listeners, I ask, who has it right? Do people need to be kept in line, or should they remain free to do as they wish?
Like the septic.
The internet seems to cause these stellar examples of bad thinking to breed and mutate with a rapidity that is shocking. Part of this seems to simply be the lack of critical thinking skills on the part of the involved parties. Information has a way of infecting anyone who has not properly inoculated themselves with knowledge and reason. If presented with something which seems logically sound, many will accept it based on a logical fallacy. Simply being aware of what kinds of logical fallacies exist can go a long way toward halting this sort of blind acceptance. But does that really explain it all? Why do so many intelligent and seemingly reasonable people insist upon conspiracy theories? Part of it has to do with the fact that human beings can convince themselves of almost anything, no matter how far-fetched, and once convinced, they tend to automatically reject evidence which refutes their beliefs, while at the same time owing more credit than is due to evidence which seems to support their beliefs. And before you write these people off as idiots, please understand that it's not their fault. Not entirely, anyway. It's just the way the human brain is wired. If you're a Westerner between the ages of 14 and 40, there's a good chance that you're dissatisfied with popular media's interpretation of reality and are actively seeking alternatives. As such, you may be exploring conspiracy theory yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. By all means, take advantage of the wealth of knowledge available to you. Now, more than any other time in the history of the world, human beings are able to learn absolutely everything they wish to know about any subject at almost no monetary cost. But with this wealth of information, there is a need for one to practice discernment. Nobody can tell you all the answers. You have to weigh the evidence and figure it out on your own. So while you're looking for answers, try to keep these things in mind. Part 1. It's a slippery slope. A prerequisite of most conspiracy theory is the suspension of disbelief. One is introduced to a concept which seems utterly implausible, and yet which seems to bear the fruit of truth. For example, the idea of the world's governments being run by an elite secret society seems like something out of bad science fiction, but one must consider certain realities. There was indeed a Bavarian Illuminati, founded on May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. It was structured similarly to the Freemasons. It may have, in fact, been modeled after them. In any case, the two groups became intertwined. It is true that many world leaders have been members of the Freemasons. If one so wishes, they can draw any number of corollaries there, take quotes or statistics out of context, and draw the conclusion, which many have, that there is a complex, world-spanning system of total global dominance in play. And maybe that's not entirely untrue either. Maybe there are a few nuggets of truth hiding in such an unworkable mess. I don't know. I'm hardly an expert on the Illuminati or secret societies, but that's not really the point. The point, and the problem, is that once one starts shrugging off conventional wisdom in favor of entertaining fringe ideas, the tendency is often to see how far one can take it. A common phrase used to describe this searching activity is seeing how far down the rabbit hole goes, which is rather comical since those who use that terminology usually fail to recognize that the rabbit hole, and all after it, represented an illusionary landscape played out entirely within the mind of the protagonist in Lewis Carroll's classic Alice in Wonderland. The term, "we're all mad here," has never been more apropos. If you go looking through this stuff for long enough, you're bound to run into people who will tell you that the world governments are in collusion with extraterrestrials. These extraterrestrials use the bulk of humans as cattle, alternatively feeding off blood and bone, or off fear, depending on which camp you talk to. You will meet people who will tell you that the Queen of England, George Bush Jr. and Sr., Barack and Michelle Obama, and even the Pope are all secretly reptilians with false human bodies, handpicked and placed there by our alien overlords. They will tell you that the moon landing was staged, They will also tell you that there are secret bases on the dark side of the moon. How do you even argue with that? You don't. That sort of thing is the philosophical equivalent of color signaling patterns on poisonous or venomous animals. It means, stay away, you're not going to win this, no matter what you try. Only, instead of getting poisoned, you might actually find yourself believing this stuff, which might be worse.
I warn you, dear theorists, that my findings may be the single most disturbing revelation that this show has ever. In the aftermath of World War II, as the US and Russia fought to become the world's dominant superpower, the US government instituted what was known as Operation Paperclip, a covert operation to recruit top Nazi scientists, many of whom had studied brainwashing and torture, some who had even been prosecuted as war criminals. With their help, the US began researching mind control and behavior modification techniques under various code names: Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, and perhaps the most troubling, MK Ultra. I would make a joke here about this being a prequel installment for the Mortal Kombat universe, but the work of these agents was nothing to laugh about, because MK Ultra was a covert operation performed on unsuspecting citizens of the US and Canada. Beginning in 1953, using front organizations like prisons, hospitals, and universities, the CIA began subjecting civilians to psychotropic drugs like LSD in an attempt to unlock the secrets of brainwashing and develop the perfect truth serum. For example, the CIA set up whorehouses where they secretly drugged horny men before watching their behaviors behind one-way mirrors. In a joke that writes itself, the mission was named Operation Midnight Climax. But not all of their operations were so rife with comedy. One mental patient in Kentucky was given daily doses of LSD for half a year. Then there's the work of Dr. Ewan Cameron, who put patients with minor depression and anxiety issues into drug-induced comas, where he tried to brainwash them using tape-recorded messages. Horrific? Yes, making it all the more important to note that during this time, Dr. Cameron was selected to serve as president of the World Psychiatric Association. And even though this happened between the 50s and 70s, the stories continue to come out. In 2009, documents were uncovered suggesting that a mass psychotic outbreak in the French village of Pont Saint-Esprit, originally blamed on a bread fungus, may have resulted from a massive MK Ultra test. And like the Bourne Identity, all of this had to stay quiet, like in 1953 when Frank Olson, a US Army biochemist and biological weapons researcher, suddenly quit his job after having moral concerns about their actions. He was found dead a week later. Originally ruled as a suicide from jumping out a window, in 1994, 40 years later, a new autopsy revealed that he had been knocked unconscious prior to being thrown out a 13th story window. In November of 1980, Atari released Battlezone, a vector graphic tank shooter equipped with 3D goggles, making it the first ever virtual reality game. A month later, the US Army contacted Atari to make a special version of that game that could be used to train actual tank gunners. But here's the thing, LSD can be anything, from a liquid, to a pill, to a little breath strip, or even a piece of jello. As part of MK Ultra's attempts to stay unidentified, the CIA literally hired a magician to teach field agents how to slip LSD into the drinks of its targets. In addition, a related project, Project SPAN, had scientists trying to determine if the drug LSD could be used in an aerosol form. Finally, we get to the side effects: night terrors, memory loss, suicide. All of these are symptoms pointing towards post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which can easily occur from bad LSD trips. Just take it from one former soldier who was interrogated using this method.
That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating, felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins, you know, just everywhere. Oh, it just...
Many speculate that being unprepared for LSD can cause individuals to feel like they're going crazy, that they're starting to lose control of their mind. Young, unsuspecting gamers, easy targets. Only trick is with the timing. With the Watergate scandal hot in the news in 1973, the head of the CIA ordered all MKUltra documents destroyed and the experiments discontinued, a full 7 years before Polybius supposedly hit Portland. However, a misfiling resulted in 20,000 documents surviving the purge, which is how we know about MKUltra in the first place. But wait a minute. A misfiling resulted in some of the government's darkest secrets coming to light? I don't buy it. And neither does Victor Marchetti, a 14-year CIA veteran who served during this period, quit, and later wrote his own expose, the first book in history the federal government of the United States ever went to court to censor. Victor has gone on the record to say that the CIA closing down MKUltra was a cover story, a disinformation campaign to distract people from the real tests still happening. I quote, "The real reason for the official secrecy in most instances is not to keep the opposition from knowing what is going on. The enemy usually does know. The basic reason for governmental secrecy is to keep you, the American public, from knowing. For you too are considered the opposition, the enemy. In fact, they can even lie to you about what they are doing or have done, and you will not know it." End quote. And doesn't it make sense that an experiment like Polybius would have no paper trail? Sure, running experiments on unsuspecting civilians is appalling, but administering drugs and subliminal messaging to children? That's indefensible. So
Psychedelic guru Terence McKenna once said, when questioned about conspiracy theory,
"Conspiracy theory is a kind of epistemological cartoon about reality. I mean, isn't it so simple to believe that things are run by the Greys and that all we have to do is trade sufficient fetal tissue to them and we can solve our technological problems? Or isn't it comforting to believe that the Jews are behind everything, or the Communist Party, or the Catholic Church, or the Masons?" Well, these are epistemological cartoons. It's, kindergarten stuff in the art of amateur historiography.
of course, this is the same man who thought he had pinned down the structure of time and its end date of December 21st, 2012, based on observations he made with the I Ching when he was regularly dosed on psilocybin mushrooms over a period of many months. So, well, he still had a point, but you kind of have to take what he says with a grain of salt, don't you? Actually, his bizarre theories further illustrate my point. In the absence of real, solid, scientifically repeatable evidence, even the most seemingly logical points of view can result in some pretty bizarre conclusions. Whether you genuinely believe that the government has your best interest at heart and wants you to succeed, or you believe that they are in total control of every aspect of the world and seek to create a slave class, which includes you are falling prey to a tendency to oversimplify the human condition and make assumptions that you cannot possibly back up. In fact, McKenna's earlier quote went on when he said,
I believe that the truth of the matter is far more terrifying. That the real truth that dare not speak itself is that no one is in control. Absolutely no one. This stuff is ruled by the equations of dynamics and chaos. Now, there may be entities seeking control, but to seek control is to take enormous aggravation upon yourself. It's like trying to control a dream, you see.
The point is, human beings are just that, human. Look at the world around you. How many people do you know who are truly evil? Our most hated citizens are generally exceptions to the rule, made remarkable by their distinct lack of humanity. Even then, nobody is ever the villain in their own tale. In truth, there are very few people in the world who cackle madly while rubbing their hands together and plotting world domination. Generally, those who do are quickly put away because they don't play well with others. But at the same time, people tend to be self-involved. Even those who aim to be selfless are still doing it for the joy it gives them, ultimately a selfish, if good-natured reason. It's probably not possible to sum a single person up entirely, much less an entire cultural group, governing body, race, class, or whatever other unit of division you can dream up. People are pretty complex.